Be sure to follow my Twitch over at twitch.tv/Daltnix. Thank you. Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at a Titan exotics, and I plan on putting them into a tier list. How I plan on rating these goes as following. The meta is our top option, which is going to be the top of the line exotics that are just great at every aspect of the game. Then we have good, which is an overall good exotic. I wouldn't second guess you for running it, but it's definitely not the most meta by any means, but it can still definitely get the job done. Bad isn't necessarily, it doesn't mean that the exotic is necessarily bad. It's just very niche, and you're not going to get the benefit of the exotic very much. Probably maybe like once or twice a game. Awful, which is you should just never use this exotic. It is terrible. And then we have good for sixes. There's certain exotics that are good for slaying out and taking out groups of people, but overall isn't the strongest in something like trials or comp. And for the most part, I'm going to be ranking these exotics based on that criteria. How good it is in a competitive match where you have like 3 high skill players versus 3 other high skill players. How well will it perform? And real quick, I plan on making videos for all 3 classes. The Hunter one should have been out yesterday, so it's already released. And then the Warlock one should be out tomorrow if you'd like to check that out. But without further ado, let's get into it. We have Ambient Leap. So what this exotic does is it will enhance your Dragon's Lash aspect on Prismatic or Strand Titan. And instead of just sending 1 line of suspension out, it will send 3 out, which isn't bad. It's definitely a niche pick, but I don't think it's necessarily good once you match players who know what you're doing. So I'm going to put it in the bad category. I don't necessarily think it's terrible. You can get it to work, but once players realize what you're doing, it's pretty easy to avoid. But it can make for some fun meme kills, but other than that, not really much of a reason to run this. Then we have ACD Feedback Fence, which I think is a good exotic. Overall, it makes it so people can't really punch you. You have to watch out for it. It can get a lot of double kills. I've seen so many clips of people getting multi-kills, such as like 4 or 5 people, because the amount of people are around, and if you have a bunch of armor charges. And it's also just good at getting armor charges. You punch somebody, you get an armor charge. So it can be good for that purpose as well. I don't necessarily think it's a top of the line pick, because when you get to higher skill brackets, people aren't punching as much, but it's still really, really good, especially when you're playing against a bunch of Titans. Acmeum Roar Rig. This is great if you use auto rifles. It can make it so you can reload, but for the most part, it's kind of just a whatever pick. Auto rifles, for the most part, have enough in the mag for PvP to get a bunch of kills, so it's slowly funneling ammo in. Doesn't really do a whole lot for most weapons. It could be pretty good for Suros, or if you're memeing out with Sweet Business, it can be all right as well, but for the most part, it's just kind of whatever. Now, Aeons, actually a very strong pick. If you use the Sector of Vigor, it will make it so whenever an ally dies, it will give you some class ability energy. So I'm going to put this in the good category, just because it can make it so you can get lots of barricades as your teammates die, or you get a res, which will give you a full barricade. Honestly, not a bad pick. And then we have Antaeus Wards. Though this exotic was top of the meta, it was like all the way up here. It would have been on a tier of its own at one point. I think it's just kind of a bad exotic now. The fact that it takes up your class ability to reflect energy, is your shield and barricade is just so strong. It's not really worth getting rid of, and it's just, it can be a niche pick. It can occasionally help you out, but I don't think it's worth getting rid of your barricade for. The Ouroboros Warden, it's an okay exotic. I don't think it's awful. I think it's just in the bad category. I don't necessarily think it has super, like, a whole lot of utility, but there are some builds where it's okay. On Strand Titan, it could be kind of fun to throw it at people and suspend them, but and vice versa. If you're playing on Void Titan, it can be pretty good to throw at your teammates to give them a shield and protect them. But overall, it's nothing super crazy, but it can be very fun and very memeable for 6v6. Still won't say it's good, but it could be fun. Armamentarium, it gives you an extra grenade. I mean, it's all right, but there's just way better exotics, so I'll put it in the bad. Starting off not super hot with our exotics, but that's okay. But speaking of an actual good exotic, Ashen Wake. This exotic buffs your fusion grenades up to be pretty lethal. Being able to throw them and immediately take someone out and get your grenade back every single time you get a melee kill can be very strong in the right hands, and depending on what weapons you're using, definitely a very underrated pick in my honest opinion. Speaking of another underrated pick, I think the Lens Cap is another good exotic, making it so you can get free Diamond Lances whenever you shoot somebody when you're behind your rally barricade. Though it makes it for a bit of a slower playstyle, it's still very, very strong, if I'm being honest. Diamond Lances are one of the strongest abilities in the game, and the fact that you can get them on such a short cooldown with the Rally Barricade is very, very strong. Just like in Teus Wards, we have Sightins, where being top of the meta behind, like ahead of everything else, now I think it's pretty awful. The shield pretty much falls over when you shoot it, and it's not really worth it. You can typically get one shot off. Plus, it slows down your class ability regeneration rate, just not very good. Crest of Alpha Loopy gives you some extra orbs and healing. It's an okay exotic, but I'm still going to put it in the bad just because it does okay, but it's not really worth it. Then we have Curious, awful exotic, doesn't really do anything. The only thing that's beneficial about this is because you're already going to be one-shotting people with Thunder Crash and PvP anyway, is the fact you come out of your Thunder Crash with an overshield, but you don't really need it. Then we have Doomfangs, which honestly, I'm going to controversial take here. I'm going to put good for 6s. Doomfang makes it so you can get a bunch of voided weapon surges, which is fine. That's great. But the big thing is it will grant you 10% super energy whenever you get a powered melee kill. If you shoulder charge somebody, this was a lot easier back in the day to get when you could just one hot shot shoulder charge people. But if you get pretty good at doing this, you can get your super very, very fast if you can get a bunch of void melee kills. So for 6s, it's not bad. For everything else, it's pretty awful. But getting 10% of super energy back from one melee kill is very strong. Then we have Dune Marchers. I'll put this one in meta just because the chaining, though it got nerfed, is still really, really good. And the increased speed on Titan is just fantastic. Titan will take anything to move a little bit quicker. Not really much to say about Dune Marchers. Great movement exotic, as well as, like I said, the chaining capability. Eternal Warrior, it's pretty awful. It can give you a decent chunk of extra damage because of the surges when you pop your super, but this forces you to use Fist of Havoc, which is terrible. It's a little bit better with, the helmet on, making it so you can't take precision damage, but it's pretty bad. I would never really consider running it. Hall of Fire Heart, another pretty bad exotic, doesn't really do anything for you. Gives you a passive 20 to AE, which honestly I didn't even really know about until the recording of this video. But other than that, it doesn't really do a whole lot for you. When you have your super charged, it will give you a lot of grenade and melee energy. But for the most part, if you have your super, you want to use it. You don't really want to hold on to it. Plus, none of the Sunbreaker abilities are necessarily the most crazy thing in the world that you'd want to have at that rapid speed. So the most I could say for this one is it's good for 6s, but I'm just going to put it in awful, not very good. Then we have Hazardous Propulsion, our newest Titan exotic. This will make it so whenever you hit a hex shot, it will build up a stack, and the more stacks you build up, the more rockets that will be sent out when you send out your barricade. There's some pretty funny meme builds that I plan on covering on the channel at some point with this one, but I don't necessarily think it's good for PvP, amazing for PvE, but I'll put it in the bad category because it's very niche and you can have some fun with it with certain builds, but it's not going to be doing anything super crazy. I will say one thing to note that is really strong about this is those rockets will nuke an enemy barricade. So if they have a barricade in front of you and you throw one in front of them, you'll just knock it down immediately. But other than that and some of the meme builds, this thing doesn't really do a whole lot for you, but that's okay. It's definitely more of a PvE exotic. Then we have Heart of Vimos Light, which will increase your ability regens by a pretty substantial amount, but you're not really spamming your abilities that much in PvP, so it's pretty bad. It can help a little bit. You need to kind of be spamming your abilities back to back to back and just keep chaining them to really utilize this exotic. But you're not doing that in PvP. In PvE, there are plenty of builds where that can work, and it overall isn't bad. Plus, in PvP, its regeneration capabilities is a little nerfed. Understandably so. It's PvP. They want to try to limit some of the ability uptime, that is available to us, but don't tell that to any Prismatic Hunter main. So it's just not the greatest. Then we have Helmesate 14, which makes the bubble good, but you shouldn't really be running an exotic for your super because in trials or comp, you'll lose your entire super bar if you switch to this, and then if you're running it the entire game, it doesn't really do anything for you. So I'm gonna put it in the awful just because if you're running this, it's good at what it does. If you pop the bubble, it makes the bubble good, but if you're running this the entire game, you're not running another exotic, so it's pretty bad. Don't run it. Then we have Hoarfrost Z, which controversial take, but I'm gonna put this one in meta. This thing is super, super strong. I'm telling you, once people realize how strong Stasis Titan is, especially when you put 3 of them on a team in trials, it's just not okay. I'll make a build video at some point, so be sure to subscribe for that, but it's just not okay. Icefall Mantles. These things can be fun, but they're pretty bad. You get a free damage bonus, which is great, but the fact that you can't sprint just is... it's so bad. It makes it so that you can pop it. If any sane player just runs away from you, you got nothing. You got to cancel the shield, and then your exotic's useless again. You got a little bit of a damage bonus, but meh. Then we got Skullfort, which is an arc exotic. It will give you 100% of your melee back when you get a kill. This was great when one-shot shoulder charge was a thing, but it's not really needed. The health regeneration that it gives is in bad because the knockout nerfs. It's just not very good. Not very good at all. Then we have Capri's Horn, very memeable, but very bad. You cast your barricade, sends out the fire. It can be not like the worst thing in the world. It can definitely get some kills, especially if somebody doesn't see it coming, but it's not. Lion Rampants, this is fantastic for PvE, and I don't think it's awful. It's not unusable, and depending on what you're using, such as like DMT, it can be work, but it's definitely bad. I would not really use it the most. I would definitely not use it that much. Then we have Loreley Splendor, which I think it's good. Restoration got nerfed however long ago, but it's still good, getting free restoration. But the big thing that's so strong about this is it makes it so people can't push your barricade. Because the sunspot goes at your feet, if they touch your barricade even a little bit, you will take them out. So it's good at that, just helping play defensive. And the restoration is nice too, of course. Mask of the Quiet One. I wish I could put this thing down into like terrible tier. Like I wish I could throw it all the way down here, but we're just gonna put it into awful. It does nothing. You get 5% ability energy back upon receiving damage, which is just, it's so pointless. So as I'm doing this tier list, I'm just learning that Titans have really bad exotics. They have some good ones, but a lot of their exotics are just awful and mid. Speaking of awful and mid, Mark 44 Stand-Asides grants you an overshield if you run around, but then it leaves when you don't, so awful. Then we have No Backup Lands, which is our shotgun-based exotic. It's just, you don't have enough ammo for this to normally really matter that much, but it does give you a 10% increase to damage when you have an overshield, which isn't bad. Shotgun kills will refresh your overshield and add to its duration, so it's like, it's not a terrible exotic. I think I'll put it in the bad tier. It's not awful, but it's not good either, especially with the limited shotgun ammo we have now. Not really worth using your exotic slot on. Then we have One-Eyed Mask, which I would say this one's meta. It's very strong. You mark an enemy, you take them down, you get a 95 HP overshield. Just a strong pick. Great for getting multi kills, and overall very strong neutral game exotic. You can run it on any class. It can give you some extra survivability. Not really much to say about One-Eyed. It's not as broken as it used to be, but it's still really, really good. Then speaking of another S tier exotic, Peacekeepers. S tier makes SMGs feel amazing. SMGs aren't obviously in the best spot in the meta, but they're still very good. If you know how to use an SMG and play your spacing, you can take over games still, just as you could prior to the fact. It's just they don't have the absurd range that they used to. Peregrine Greaves, we're going to put in good. Honestly, one-shot shoulder charge is very strong, especially when people don't see it coming. And it makes it so people can't really push you, especially on smaller maps like Endless. You can just kind of like jump around in the air, around the cubbies. And if anybody pushes you at all, you just shoulder charge them. And if they miss their shotgun or aren't ready for it, you just take them out. And then each shoulder charge has their own specific effect. So either you're going to come out of it with an overshield, you'll come out with a sunspot, you'll come out of it with so on, etc. Overall, just a good pick. All right, now we got Phoenix Cradle, and these things are awful. I remember I had to make a video for these things because somebody requested it, and I told them I would if they, left a comment on a certain amount of videos. So when I made that video, it was just like, these things don't really do anything. It makes your sunspots last a little bit longer and your Soul Invictus last longer, but Soul Invictus doesn't really do that much. It also gives your Soul Invictus to your teammates, but it's just kind of pointless. You're typically using sunspots to get restoration, not for Soul Invictus. Soul Invictus helps you get some ability energy back, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter, making this exotic pretty pointless. Now, Point Contact Brace. Now, this is an interesting exotic. It's a Thunderclap exotic, which Thunderclap is an interesting ability. I think Thunderclap is a little bit underrated. I think if you get good with it, it's actually not terrible. Obviously, Shoulder Charge is better, so I understand why people use it. But for this exotic, we'll put it in the bad category because it does a fair amount for the Thunderclap, giving you a decent amount of energy back. You'll get 15% whenever you get a kill, but also it jolts, but you don't necessarily need to hit them with the Thunderclap for it to jolt. So it's not like terrible, but it's not the greatest. I wouldn't put it in awful, so that's why it's here. If there was a category in between bad and awful, I'd probably put it in there, but it's definitely better than most of these exotics. Then going from a bad exotic to a really good one, Precious Scars. Amazing exotic, especially if you use it on a solar class with a solar weapon. But for any class, it really does the job. Being able to get restoration for free anytime you get in a kill matching your subclass with your weapons is fantastic. It's kind of like a mini one-eyed mask, but it also gets those benefits in revive game modes where it gives you a massive overshield whenever somebody reses you or you res them, just making for a super strong pick. Then we have Pyrogills. This is an amazing exotic for PvE, terrible for PvP. It adds a little extra storm at the end of your cryoclasm, but it does such little damage, and it makes the super so much worse that like the super you'd think would be very strong, just being a shutdown super, and it would hit somebody and take them out immediately, but no, it's terrible. Just do not use these things for PvP. Then we have second chances, which will give you an additional shield throw, which isn't terrible because it will also make your shield throw weaken. So you'll volatile and weaken somebody with a shield throw. It's just shield throw is kind of whatever. It's a niche pick. So I'm going to put it in awful just because it's not very good. It's just not. It's fun, but it's not very good. Then we have Severance Enclosure, which actually at one point wasn't bad when the explosions were at a ridiculous range, but they've since nerfed that, so it's an awful exotic. It doesn't really do much for you. It can do an okay amount of damage. If somebody's close, I believe it can one-shot them, but it's just like they have to be like right on top of the person for it to really do anything, and it's just not worth it. Then we have Strongholds, which is your sword exotic. Pretty bad. It's can get the job done, can, block a bunch of damage, get you some restoration times too. And honestly, with the new special sword in the game, I'm sure you could make a play with it in PvP, but you're not really having a lot of sword ammo, so not really a reason to run this one. Then we have Syntheseps, which Syntheseps, depending on your build, can be very good. I feel like if you're playing a very melee-focused build, it can be a good pick. Just the amount of damage that you get. Obviously, at one point, Syntheseps increased your melee range. It doesn't do that anymore. When it did, it was here, but since then, I'd say it's down here. It gives you increased handling and whatnot when people are close, but the main reason you're using this is to one-punch people with knockout or the ballistic slam or whatever it may be. It's a good pick if you're building into it. If you're not really building into it, it's kind of just whatever, but I'd say it's good for the main reason that you'd be running it is to punch people in the face and do increased damage. Then we have Path of the Burning Steps. This is a really sad one for me because at one point this exotic was actually really, really good. Well, I wouldn't say really good, but it was an enjoyable exotic. But since they changed it to the Surge bonus, it's just so meh and put it in the awful tier with all these other ones. Titans have a lot of really bad exotics, and that's looking like it's going to continue with Ursa's. Again, really bad. They have a little bit of a play with the new aspect Unbreakable, which is okay, but again, it's not really worth running that aspect, as well as running this just for your super is not worth it. You're not going to get enough super energy to make it really all that viable. And then we have Worm Gods, and controversial take here, it's fun for sixes. It can make it so you can one punch people, and that is a lot of fun. I have an old video using these things, and it was just hilarious just being able to one punch everybody with Striker Titan. Overall, for 3v3 game modes, it's awful, but for 6v6, it can be a lot of fun. In terms of the class item, very similar to the Hunter tier list. I'm going to put it in S tier just because you can get Ophidian aspects on it and a variety of other things. If you can get Ophidian aspects and point contact, wherever I put that, it's kind of like a mini but better Dune Marchers, if I'm being honest with you, because you don't really need to use Thunderclap to get the jolt, so you can Shiver Strike somebody, jolt them, punch them again, and chain to everybody. It's super, super good, honestly. Then lastly, we have Wishful, our new Strand Titan exotic. Will give you an increased Frenzy Blade and will do increased damage the more you hit. You're already hitting 2 to take somebody out. It's kind of whatever. You can get more with Banner of War, which isn't bad, but I'm going to put it in the awful just because you're not really using it. Banner of War can be pretty good in PvP if you can really get it going for sixes, but other than that, that's the most I could put it in here, but you don't need this exotic for that to work, so it's pretty bad. But overall, this is my Titan tier list. Titans have a lot of just really bad or mid exotics, but they do have some really, really good ones as well. It's just the bad ones are just really bad and pretty pointless. But let me know how you feel. Let me know how I did. Let me know down in the comments. If you'd like to check out the Hunter build, I posted that one yesterday. Link should be on screen here at the end of the video, and then the Warlock one will also be tomorrow, so be sure to subscribe for that. Also leave a like if you do agree with me, and if you don't, let me know down in the comments. I'm sure someone will call me stupid. These tier list videos has very interesting comment sections, but thank you guys so much and have a good rest of your day.